stress isn't necessarily bad for you. It's how you think it impacts you.
Raia Carey is a motivational speaker, life coach, and consultant who helps people tap into their potential
through building confidence, authenticity, and mental resilience.
They had a case study where one group saw the stressor as a positive and the other group saw the stressor as a negative. The group that saw it as a negative had physical impacts. Their arteries were clogged, their blood pressure was high. The people who deemed stress a positive in some way had none of those symptoms.
Does the negative self-talk, the imposter syndrome, does that lead to a lack of confidence, or does a lack of confidence lead to imposter syndrome?
Someone could be confident and be heavily experiencing imposter syndrome. So if your negative self-talk is saying you're a failure, you'll never do this, you can, and then all of a sudden it starts to subside.
If someone comes to you and says, Raia, I'm struggling with confidence, what's the first thing they should do?
So
Raia, welcome to Gents Talk.
thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I can't believe it's taken us this long to even come across one another. Like, I've seen your work at a distance, but to finally just like, hey, I'm Samir, you're Raia. Nice to meet you.
The timing was right.
Exactly.
And then we really made it happen quickly.
Very quickly.
I went like, hi, nice to meet you. See you next week.
Yeah, exactly. See you next week, and then next week we're going to be working together again.
Literally,
So you're a keynote speaker. You're a motivational speaker. You talk about so many topics that resonate with me, resonate with the audience, and I'm excited to dive into them because one of the things that I think when you and I connected sort of for our pre-episode taping, we talked about, resilience mentally, confidence, imposter syndrome.
We did, yeah.
And that one's a personal favorite of mine because that's the one that I struggle with the most. I say this all the time on the episodes. Half the time I don't think anyone is ever watching. And I get a random message saying, hey, I saw the episode. I loved it. And I'm just like, oh, somebody watched. This is great.
Like one person.
Yeah. But that's part of the journey that I think so many people struggle with. I've had award-winning artists, millionaire entrepreneurs, billionaire entrepreneurs, experts, everyone talk about how to some degree they've struggled with that.
For sure, yep.
And so I'm turning to you, Coach Carey.
Yeah.
Help me understand how it works. Help me understand, how to identify when it's happening, maybe what triggers it, and how to resolve it. Because I think imposter syndrome affects confidence.
For sure, it does.
And then ultimately affects your ability to be resilient.
Absolutely.
So why don't we start there?
Yeah. Whoa, coming in hot.
Yeah.
With my background in psychology and just with the work that I do that you mentioned, imposter syndrome was a topic that was coming up a lot. So I wanted to do a deep dive for myself so I could better understand it and then teach people how to move through it. So first and foremost, the name is so, negative. So naturally people attach something bigger than what it is to it. Imposter syndrome. It's not a syndrome. It's literally our negative self-talk taking up a little bit more real estate in our mind, in our mental space, than it probably needs to. You know how every person kind of has that, good side talking to them or that negative side?
Yeah.
That's essentially, in its essence, what imposter syndrome is. It's that self-doubt. It's that negative self-talk. And, I don't think there's a way that each person can fully be rid of it forever. I think that is a natural part of life. Like, do I deserve this? Am I meant for this? These questions will come up. But I think we can get rooted in that understanding ourselves and valuing ourselves and having that love and respect that we are so much more anchored that when it does show up, we're not impacted so negatively. And I think it's really important that people recognize that it really comes down to language. So if you had a big deliverable due the next day and you say, wow, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I didn't do that. They're not going to pick me anyways. I'm going to fail. Naturally, that's the aura and the energy and the vibration that you're putting out. And now you've put yourself in this box. But if you shift it to, I'm trying my best. I've done other things in the past that have helped me get to a place that I'm here. So that stands to reason that I could probably get to this next place. And then what's important is that our negative self-talk is never prepared for rebuttals. So our subconscious is more of an output function, right? So it can say things, but it can't really rebuttal. So if your negative self-talk is saying you're a failure, you'll never do this, you can give it examples of how you have. And then all of a sudden it starts to subside. And I think for me, that is the biggest thing I want to teach people about imposter syndrome, is really reprogramming the language that you're using when you're talking to yourself or about yourself.
So it's about, I guess one thing that you could potentially do in that scenario is maybe just keep a list of some of your more recent.
I like to call it, where are the receipts?
Yes. Okay.
Show me the receipts, right? I can never do this. Oh, really? You've done it 10 other times in your life. Just remind yourself of that. That's not going to completely get rid of it, but it'll stop the negative self-talk from showing up as much, because now you've given it an example.
Yeah.
And it's not prepared to combat that.
What's the biggest misunderstanding around so if it's not imposter syndrome, if it's not a syndrome, what do you call it?
I don't know. I haven't figured out an exact good name that resonates for me, but maybe I would call it imposter thinking.
Okay. So what's the biggest misconception around imposter thinking?
I would say the biggest misconception is that it's something that people can't get out of, and it's something that has to stay permanently, and something that people can't move through. So let's say someone wants to apply to be a CEO or whatever it might be, something really big. I think people think that imposter syndrome is the reason they can't actually achieve it. When it's a contributor, but it's not the reason, unless it absolutely stops you from taking any actionable steps forward. But you can still get back and still take actionable steps. It's never a fully shut down or complete hindrance forever. But it's going to poke you and prod you and really see, how bad do you want this?
Is there, what steps do you struggle with it too, I presume?
Of course, yeah, everybody does.
What do you do when that's happening? So you, the coach, the motivational speaker, the keynote speaker who talks about
pressure.
Yeah. When that happens to you, what do you do?
So the steps that I've created for people are really because I did it for myself. I can't speak to people about something I haven't done or put myself through. That, to me, wouldn't be integral as a coach. I can't ask my clients to go somewhere I've never been. So I really, number one, keep my receipts. So if I constantly go back to that.
Is it like something you have written down?
Yeah, I have it in a note in my phone.
Okay.
Then I'm really big on language, even just with everything I do, all my work. Like as a coach, I'm listening to what people are saying, but I'm hearing what they're not saying. So for me, the language is the biggest one, and not just in those moments, but it's really just like yoga as a practice, because you do it consistently. So is your language. So no matter the day, no matter what I'm going through, I always come back to, how am I talking to myself? And a great way to kind of instill that in each person more on the subconscious level is affirmations.
Okay.
So the reason affirmations work so well, and yes, social media has kind of made it seem like it's just, ooh, affirmations and I'm going to feel great. It's more of a science backed, because the more you say it, the more you feel it, the more you believe it. So if every single day a person said to themselves, I am strong, I love myself, I'm important, I'm valued, whatever resonates for them, over time, their subconscious is going to be like, okay, let's keep this. And then on those tough moments, your subconscious is supporting you subconsciously so that your conscious mind doesn't have to do as much work. So that's the goal that I hope and wish for everyone, that they get to a place where it's a little bit more embedded in their subconscious, so that moving through their day-to-day, that language doesn't take them down as much. It might still be there, but it won't take them to a zero.
So the language is the key part of the whole problem.
Huge.
Because I know that when I struggle with it, I've tried to do the receipts thing, and sometimes it works. You know, I'll take a step back and I'll go, okay, if you truly think, Samir, for a moment that no one's actually watching the podcast that you just dropped because, let's say, I don't know, some clip you posted online didn't do very well that day. And suddenly that's the reason why you think nobody watches the entirety of the podcast. But here you are, you've done talks, you've spoken to incredible people, you've traveled for it, you've done A, B, and C. Those are the receipts.
For sure.
But then there are times still where I look at that and I go, that's great, but that's in the past. What am I doing now? What's next? And
Comparison is a thief of joy.
Thank you.
I got you.
And then I start looking at other podcasts that are similar to this one, or ones that I aspire to become like.
Right.
And I go, there's a reason why I don't have those numbers, or whatever the case may be. And so I don't know what to do in those moments.
Great. Let's work on that right now if you're open to it.
Yes, please. Because just this week I've struggled with that.
Yeah, for sure. How could you not? But let's look at it as you care about this work. And you also care about being successful. Two great things. But it just feels like they're a little bit out of balance. So there's number one. You said, well, no one's watching this podcast. But that's not true. But let's shift what you attach your value of success to people watching this.
Okay.
For a lot of people, when it comes to imposter syndrome, it also comes down to their value. Like, where do they get their own personal value? Which is tricky because a lot of people don't know what their values are, where they get it from. So what if we shifted that to, I'm passionate about my work, and these conversations I know could help even one person. And if it helps even one person, then I know I'm continuing on my path. That is going to empower you to not care about the numbers and care about your craft more. And inevitably, the numbers and the impact will continue to grow. But that allows you to serve from here. Because at the end of the day, you're serving. You're providing impact for humans to learn from.
Yeah.
So the number doesn't matter. Like, if we think about it, when social media first came out, one like was cool. And then it got completely misconstrued. So that's even what I had to do for myself. If I said, if it can help one person, then I'm doing my life's work.
It's fascinating you talk about that, because when I was preparing for a TED Talk, I was reading a book called Talk Like TED. And in it, there was references to videos that, surpassed 1 million views, and how that was like exponentially incredible in every single way. And today you'll see a video of a cat doing nothing, just sitting there, and that'll get like 10 million views, and you go, like, what has happened here? And sometimes that pisses me off too.
Same,
because like,
honestly,
you work so hard.
Yeah. You're like, the cat?
Yeah,
really?
Exactly.
No value?
Exactly.
But it made people laugh.
It made people laugh, right, exactly. But I look at that and I go, okay, I'm trying to look at this, to your point, from the lens of, why do I even do this, right? And it's to help people. It's because I came from a position of, being in a dark hole, trying to overcome that, learning through the pain, and then going, there's got to be others out there that feel some of this in some way. And if I can lend my voice, or at least create a platform that lends itself to the narrative, to the conversation, maybe that helps. And to your point, when I get that one message from someone, my whole day is made. My whole week is made.
Those are your receipts.
Absolutely.
Keep those. Keep a
I
folder
screenshot
of
them
all
and I
those,
just put them together. And I was thinking the other day too, I posted a video and it barely got 200 views. And I was just like, it was... And then, of course, what do? I start doom scrolling, and I see other videos doing extremely well, and I see people I know, post a video and it does well, and a part of me just gets a little upset by that. Not a little, I get upset by it. And then I stopped to myself and I thought, I've been in a room where I've presented to 200 people. That's real impact. That's worth more in that moment. If I could capture that feeling, worth more to me than 1 million view video.
For sure.
And I'm trying to I guess, how do I bottle that? And keep going.
That's a tough one. Can you exactly bottle it? Probably not. But maybe you can shift the comparison to aspire.
Okay.
It's a very, very tiny difference, but one will empower you and omit positive frequency and energy in your body. If I'm going to geek out a little bit on science and my psychology background, there's anabolic energy and there's catabolic energy. Anabolic energy creates, catabolic energy destroys, like on atoms and cell. So the negative language we say is like literally releasing catabolic energy. You have energy, right? Every person does. Yeah. But then the positive, and I don't mean like rainbows and butterflies, but I mean empowering. Yeah. That naturally releases anabolic energy. So that's why I think if you shift from comparison to aspire, there's going to be tons of podcasts that you look up to, rather than being like, oh, why aren't I like that? It's maybe I can ask questions and see exactly how they did it, and then work towards that.
So it's reframing the way you look at a problem.
Precisely.
And you can pretty much apply that to everything.
Precisely. Those are my 3 tips: is language, receipts, reframe. But it's a practice, right? Like I may not experience imposter syndrome every day anymore, but it still happens here and there. But I do this work every single day. Every single day it takes work for me to show up at my best. But I have a really strong default, a really strong foundation. So a tough moment isn't going to bring me to a 0. A tough moment, almost like a video game. You know, when you're playing a video game and then you lose, you don't go all the way back to the beginning. Yeah. Maybe you'll go back to like level 3 or 4 or 5, which is much easier to get to level 10 from 4 than
versus
0.
1. Yeah.
Same with your energy.
Does the negative self-talk, the imposter syndrome, does that lead to a lack of confidence, or does a lack of confidence lead to imposter syndrome? Which way does it go?
I think they're interchangeable. Okay. Depending on the person. So if a person is relatively confident, but then they're experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome in their external environments, and they don't have those tools in place, that'll take their confidence to a 0. But if they're experiencing imposter syndrome and already aren't confident, it's going to take them way lower than a 0. So I think that it happens no matter what, but the important thing about confidence is that knowing within yourself, you know. And I think I've always said that everyone has access to it, because how you feel about yourself, how you talk about yourself transcends, and it really impacts how you show up in the world. So I don't think there's like chicken or the egg. Okay. For confidence and imposter syndrome, because they are, it's a delicate dance, because someone could be confident and be heavily experiencing imposter syndrome, but then I imagine a lot of people would see that person as their demeanor coming off as cocky. Because if you're inauthentic, people can feel it. Yes. Right? So that's very someone quickly. Who's feeling imposter syndrome but trying to mask it.
They're compensating.
Right. So that's why I feel like that one's a tricky one. They're very deeply connected.
If someone comes to you and says, Raia, I'm struggling with confidence, what's the first thing they should do? I'm not confident in my natural state. I'm, I consider myself average, whatever. Help me. What does that look like?
My number one would be to ask a couple of questions. Let's bring it a little bit more to the surface. What makes you feel like you're not confident? Has anyone ever told you that you don't seem like a confident person? Depending on what I get from those, I'll ask 2 more questions. And this has been the 2 questions I've asked for years, because it always helps me bring things to the surface, but also shows them, where's this coming from? So I'll always ask, tell me one thing you're proud of, and tell me one thing you feel as though you can improve upon. Major power in these 2 questions, because when you're proud of something, everyone can talk about it. They're beaming, could talk for hours. Or if they have nothing to talk about, that'll tell me a lot too. And then on the improve upon, that's where I can pull a lot of things that they might feel like they need to work on, but maybe it's just a shift. I'll give you an example. I was going to work with a client a few years ago. Same thing, said I'm not confident, I looking down, his shoulders down. We just met for coffee because I wanted to see if this was a client I wanted to take on. And he kept saying a couple important things. I'm the only person in my company that doesn't have a post-secondary education. Very upset. This, that. And I said, okay, yeah, I hear you. And then I just shifted it and I said, why is it that it's a negative that you are the only person without post-secondary education, but you were at the same level and same pay as everyone else who wasted thousands, $50,000 or more on post-secondary education? Tell me why that makes you feel upset. And he paused. And all of a sudden his shoulders got more prominent and his eye contact was better. And he said, maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe I worked really hard to get here and I'm on the same level as everybody else. And I said, exactly. He never became a client. He just needed that one shift.
So reframing.
The reframe, right? And then I would say there's a few other key things that help build confidence. I think a lot of people think it's external. And external is great, but temporary. You're like, oh, all my friends make me feel confident. That's external. You can't harness that on your tough days sometimes. It has to be able to be something you can bring from within. So
we put a lot of emphasis on external validation.
We do. Too much. And then naturally when we're not getting it or a tough day or a bad day, it's inaccessible.
Yeah.
But here is always accessible. So I like to say, always thinking about joy. What are the things that help you feel joy? Because those are the things that are naturally going to refuel your energy on a good day, on a bad day. For someone who doesn't know what joy is for themselves, okay, that's okay. You can figure that out. That takes time. But another easy one is selflessness. Because I'm trying to go from catabolic to anabolic, even if people don't know what that means, right? And let's say you see someone walking down the stairs with a stroller and you offer to help. That naturally is going to omit a new frequency and happy hormones to your brain. But you will never see that person again, and it doesn't matter because you did something without expecting anything in return. That is the magic of selflessness, because you're not expecting anything in return. I think a lot of people think it's doing something to expect something else in return. So there's lots of little things that can contribute to someone's confidence, but it's a matter of, I like to call them tools. And everybody has them, but it's a matter of picking them up from wherever they are and putting them in a place that you can consistently come back to. And then that kind of becomes your self-care practice in a way. That might be reading, that might be swimming, that might be constantly helping a stranger. Boundaries. People don't realize boundaries are a huge pillar in confidence. And they always ask me, why is it boundaries so important? And
why
I'm
is
like,
it?
let me talk about that.
Tell me.
Boundaries are important because I think we all know, they help you respect yourself and teach others how to respect you. Great. But here's where they get tricky is because, when we're implementing new boundaries, the people who are impacted by them respond negatively. So then naturally we're kind of like, ooh, I don't want to maintain this boundary now. But that is where you need to maintain that boundary. And then the most beautiful thing is that when you honor the boundaries you have implemented for yourself, or at least tried to, what you build is self-trust. And naturally, when you trust yourself, you trust your decisions, you're more decisive, and then you're building confidence. So that's why boundaries are so important. And people don't realize this. Hopefully now everybody will.
I was thinking as you were talking about boundaries is a relatively new thing for me. Maybe in the last year have I started to learn how to set boundaries. Just for example, the other day I got a text message from someone. So there's a lot that I'm doing right now. Yeah. And so my schedule for the most part is just all over the place.
Honestly, it does seem.
And we talked before we started rolling about, sometimes you have to reschedule meetings and stuff like that. And sometimes you're just not available.
100%.
And it's not for not wanting to or not caring to talk to someone. It's just that your schedule is literally just packed.
Yeah. And capacity.
Yeah. And so your bandwidth is not there. And if you were to, even if you were able to pick up the phone and speak to the person, there's nothing left in you to actually give them real connection.
You're like, speak about what?
Right.
I got nothing.
And so I often sometimes get these kinds of messages of, oh, you're too busy now, or you're too big shot. Just and I know it's said in a joking way, and I don't think that the individuals mean it in a malicious way. But to me, it always bothered me. And only recently have I started literally just saying, I don't appreciate that comment.
For sure.
And I find that it's worked.
For sure.
But it took me a while to get there because I didn't want to, I don't enjoy confrontation.
No one does, I don't think.
Yeah. And I just, sometimes I'm more quickly to just be like, whatever. Just say what you need to say, get it out of your system so you feel like you've said it, but I'm okay holding
that
on
internal self, because you weren't trusting yourself. You weren't putting yourself first. You were putting others first. Yeah. And I think that comments like that are also from a place of ego for the other person. There's a little bit of that resentment or jealousy, even a little bit. But I've also realized when you're on the path to get to where you're going, whether that's your career, etc., you're going to disappoint people. I had to really make peace with I disappoint someone every single day, which pains me tremendously. But then I also had to remind myself that I change lives every single day. And the people who recognize that know that if you need me, I will be there. Aside from that, I will see you when I can, because I will be present and I will be full of energy, and that's the best I can do right now. And some people understand that and some people don't, and I think that the people who understand that will continue on the journey with you.
It's a hard one, though.
It's so hard. It really makes me sad. Like when you said that, I took a big deep breath, because same, you're too busy, or you didn't call me back, or it's like I didn't call you back because I had 35 missed calls and 100 texts per day. And if I think about what's my priority, it's going to be work and my parents. And if I have the capacity, out of those 35, one person can get called back. And that means I'm missing out on another 34 people that care about me. It's really tough. It's really tough. But I think reminding people that I'm not going anywhere, I'm all here, but I'm really locked in on this journey right now.
How do you share that with people? Because you also run the risk of sharing it in a way where it makes it sound like they're just not important enough.
Yeah. And
which is not the case.
It's not true. Yeah, it's not the case at all. But when you're on your journey, you know, sometimes you have to disappear. It's not because we're disappearing, it's because we're really putting all of our energy into a few things that require our utmost attention. So instead of teaching people about that, I took a different approach to really just say, okay, like, what are my friends' love languages? Some people love calls. I'm a texter because I can text everybody back at a time rather than one call, as an example. So for the friends who like calls, if I have a moment in my day and capacity, I'll randomly call them. And that lands really well on them. Even if it's 5 minutes, call them to make that plan instead of texting. It's a small shift, but nobody's mad if you have something in the cal, and especially if they like calls, that I called them. So that's what I try to do. Even if it's 5 minutes, just want to check in, thinking about you, sending you a lot of love. Let's get something in. Do these dates work for you? And then I probably won't talk to them again until the next month when we have our plan.
Right.
But I think the people who take it negatively are maybe not the people who see the work that I'm doing. And that's okay. So I will always have love for them. But the people who are coming with me on the journey, the close friends who get it, get it. I might not see some friends for 6 months, and then when we do, it's like no time has passed. That's the support I need right now. Because when I feel angst and stress and resentment and sadness, it's way more difficult for me to show up in the world and my life that I need to do. And I serve all day. So I have to be able to show up as my best. So I want the people around me who are going to pour into that in some way.
I can see how all of that can impact your confidence on a day-to-day basis.
For sure.
Because that's just another thing that's chipping away at your energy, your ability to focus on your journey and all of those things.
Okay, you're not wrong.
Because I there are times where I feel it, right? Yeah. And I'm like exhausted, and I've done I'll still pick up the phone and call, or there's times where I regretfully will pick up the phone and be on the phone, but I'm not listening.
Yeah.
And I feel terrible at the end of it because I'm in the middle of an email. But I know if I don't pick up this call that I've already now not been able to pick up twice, I'm going to, A, be upset about it because I didn't show up for my friend.
Yeah.
And B, this person, I've been on the other side where I've called people and they've just been too busy.
Yeah.
And I've felt like, oh, I'm clearly not important enough. If I was, you would have picked up. Or in the age of social media, I saw you post a story. Yeah,
how are you posting and not texting me back? It's so real.
Right.
But I'm like, I have a social media manager. She's posting, not me.
But like, it's this constant, balancing act of your journey.
For sure.
Because I think, to your point, that is the priority.
It is.
Right? Like when you finally locked in to the thing that fulfills you, gives you passion, drives you.
Yeah.
You may not know what the end destination is, but you know you're going in that general direction.
For sure.
Everything else almost has to support it or not be a part of it. It's one or the other.
In a way, yeah, 100%. You know, and I think it's inevitable that some people will feel sad or take it personal for sure. And, you know, I try my best to at least be super mindful if I know that I have messed up, like I missed the call or I didn't show up to the event or I had to cancel last minute. I'll try to make a note and give some extra energy to that person, to that friendship, to that relationship, to remind them that I'm just human. Nobody's perfect. I recognize that this is an important relationship to both of us. How can I do better? And I'll often try to send those texts like, hey, I appreciate you being patient with me. Like, what can I do to support you better or to show up better? And it's a really humbling experience, to be honest. But if I'm not willing to grow and if I'm not willing to listen to the people who love and support me, then I don't think I could show up as my best. It's a tough conversation.
What about mental resilience? You know, there's like we've all encountered people who, no matter how tough life gets, whether it's at work, family, they just seem to be able to bounce back from it.
Yeah.
They'll go through it. They'll have their time, their moments where they're really in the depths of their pain, their hurt, their frustration, their stress. But then they just bounce back and they're ready to go. I like to think of myself as someone who's mentally resilient. And I've encountered people who, because I'm aware of both myself and other people who are mentally resilient, when I come across someone who isn't, I'm like, what I don't quite know what the difference is there. So if someone's listening, watching this and goes, I know that I struggle. When something gets too stressful, I break down, I shut down, I can't function, I'm overwhelmed. What could they do to build that resiliency?
Yeah, great question. Building resiliency is tough because it's almost like trial and error. You have to go through it and get up.
You gotta get the reps in.
You have to fall and get up. You have to fall and get up because each time you learn something new. But what I will say is that I also think we put way too much pressure on ourselves. If someone is overwhelmed and it's too much, my number one suggestion to all of my clients is to shut it down. Cancel everything. Clear that calendar. Obviously within reason of the person's schedule. Do something, like literally just rest. Or go for a walk if that's available to you, or hang out with a friend who you can feel your best around, or call your parents, or go for a workout, or just something that you know will shift your energy. Have an amazing sleep, wake up early, and try again. But plan for your day a little bit differently. I don't think there's anything wrong with shutting it down. I shut it down all the time. I get overwhelmed all the time. But I have the luxury where I can shift my calendar a little bit. You know, to an extent, if I have to shift a meeting, I can do that. And I will take full responsibility and always do that. Say, hey, I've got to move these around. I just don't have the capacity. Or I'll put blocks in my calendar. So I would say give yourself a system of what to do when you do feel overwhelmed, so that way it's readily available to you, rather than us feeling like, oh my God, I'm feeling off, this is not good, I don't like this, I'm gonna fail, I'm not gonna get it done. We're scrambling. But if you give yourself a system of some kind, say, okay, when I feel overwhelmed, I do A, B, C, then that means you're gonna go to it right away, implement it right away, and probably immediately start feeling better. It's the scramble that I think takes people lower than it might need to.
Yeah, that's
because
scrambling feeling. Yeah.
It's like, what am I going to do? Right? But it's like, oh, cool. I've felt this before. And the last time I felt this, I did this, this, and this. Just having a plan immediately will start calming the nervous system.
Yeah, 'cause sometimes there's a paralysis of, there's almost too much to do and you don't know where to start, that you just shut down.
Yeah.
You find yourself staring at a screen for an hour
100%.
going, I don't know where to begin.
Yeah. I think there's a big stigma about shutting it down, but let's debunk that. Shutting it down is not a bad thing. It's just not a place for you to stay.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing grows there. If we think about how stress has been studied in the last, let's say 40 years, it was studied as one way up until about 1965. Stress is bad for you, cardiac arrest, 19th killer in the world. And then in about 1965, new psychologists started to study it differently and realized that there is good stress, bad stress. And I was fascinated when I learned this because stress was always such a big topic. And, you're in the hospital for stress, so many things.
Yeah.
And what they realized after years of case studies is that stress isn't necessarily bad for you. It's how you think it impacts you. So, for example, they had a case study where one group had the same stressors, but one group saw the stressor as a positive, and the other group saw the stressor as a negative. The group that saw it as a negative had physical impacts. Their stresses were level, their arteries were clogged, their blood pressure was high. The people who deemed stress a positive in some way had none of those symptoms. So what that showed us is that if you attach a different meaning to the stressor you may be experiencing, it'll allow your arteries to remain the same. Because when you're stressed and you see it negative, they start to close. That's why it's attached to cardiac arrest. But if you attach a positive, they remain the same, meaning it's no longer a danger zone for your physical body. And I think people have got it really misconstrued that stress is like this end-all be-all place that we live in for months, days, years, when really it's for humans to get through something. Stress is there to help you achieve something. So an easy example is you're studying for an all-nighter because you have an exam the next day. Somehow you have energy. Somehow you're up till 4 a.m. Somehow you're writing notes, taking things in. But then you write the exam and then you go home and you go to sleep. The problem is now that we're, older and in our jobs and careers is that we try to maintain that energy. We're stressed and we finished the exam and now we're going to go to work and now we're going to go have meetings. Impossible.
Yeah.
And now we're in the burnout. So stress is to help you achieve something and then you go back down. But most people are trying to achieve it and stay, and now it impacts them negatively. So stress and overwhelm are all connected, but the research shows us that when you take that time to slow down and come back, just like when you're working out, a HIIT workout, great. But if you're trying to also build muscle and support your joints, you're going a little bit slower. Same thing.
Yeah.
So the overwhelm and the shutdown is not a bad thing. It's you literally reprogramming and rehabilitating your nervous system so that you can show up again the next day.
What about the people who work in the traditional corporate environments that doesn't allow them to shut down? Because they could be stressed. They could find themselves in a stressful situation, looking to complete a deliverable for their boss, for a client, whatever. They work till midnight, they work till 2, they get it done, they present the next morning, and then to your point, rather than shutting down, they now have to jump into more meetings and basically immediately shift to the next deliverable.
Yeah. I
What
would
do they
say
do?
seasons and reasons. So yes, in the corporate space that happens a lot. But most companies now are talking about mental health, more so than ever before. Most companies, if you're full-time, you have access to some kind of benefits. You have access to some kind of day off. So unless those meetings, after you handed in that deliverable, are extremely important and you have to be there, you take that day off. That's what I would recommend. Because I think it's also easy to think, I don't want to take a day off, more work, this and that, but you need to. And maybe you schedule it on a Friday. And then you also schedule a Monday off. That means now you got 4 days. So you can come back stronger. At the end of the day, any company I've ever worked with would rather their employees come back stronger and better and feeling amazing than pushing through.
Of course.
It's actually more cost effective for the large companies as well, because if everyone's on sick leave,
that's not a good thing for anyone.
No.
Yeah.
So their ROI is ensuring that their team members feel good and healthy and are mentally in a positive space or a healthier space or a more conducive space.
Do
So
you finding corporations does this resonate with them?
I would say for most of them it does, yeah.
Okay.
Now that the research has shown.
Yeah.
You don't want your people burnt down and miserable. That's also going to impact morale, numbers, metrics, data, everything.
Right.
But if you spend a little bit more on their health benefits, they have access to therapy, massage, a day off, they're going to show up 10 times better. And naturally, as humans, when we're taken care of, we're going to pull that extra all-nighter, knowing that I can support myself with a day off after. When people are taken care of, they naturally want to do better.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of companies are receptive to this shift, for sure, especially after, COVID and
Well, I was gonna say, right? There's a few companies out there that are still hybrid models
Yep.
where people can work from home, because I
Yep.
think people have come to terms with this reality of I can no longer balance everything on a Saturday and Sunday,
You literally, especially if
which
you
is what
have
we
a
used
family.
to do. Yeah.
Like, how are you going to take your kid to a haircut and all your meetings and go to the bank and you have a day and a half?
Yeah. It just doesn't work.
Impossible.
And so I've seen companies who've said, okay, listen, we totally get it. We're going to keep some form of a hybrid model because we also believe in, still some level of being in the office twice a day, which I actually agree with, because I think
for sure.
you build bonds and relationships with your your coworkers,
Yeah.
your employers, your staff, whatever the case may
Yeah,
be.
you need a little bit of morale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then there are some companies who are just very much like, nope, back in the office 5 days a week, very rigid. And so I've seen and spoken to people who work for those kinds of organizations who have told me that they struggle more than ever, more than
bet.
pre-pandemic, because they've learned what it's like to find some level of balance. And then there's also big personalities online who are in the entrepreneurship space, different types of entrepreneurs who talk about how, unless you've got people coming back into the office all the time, you're not driven, you're not going to achieve any measure of success. And so it's also reinforcing this notion that unless you're basically working to burnout,
Right.
you're not going to achieve any level of success in your life. And I think that's such a dangerous message.
So dangerous. I would say for a lot of the companies, when they compared numbers of being in office versus not, weren't that different.
No, if anything, I think people start working more remotely.
Yeah, because everyone would rather work till 9 p.m. on a Thursday if you're getting Friday off.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of companies did summer Fridays and things like that. So, however, I do agree that there's probably some industries where you need people in office a little bit more.
Sure, absolutely.
But again, I think there's everything within reason, depending on the industry. But I think at the same time, that's why it's so important for people to have those internal tools and that system for themselves, so that way you feel you're a little bit more proactive, right? So if someone is in finance, let's say, and they know that end of March is a really intense, super time for them because it's the end of the fiscal or end of April, they might prepare differently. So yeah, like the external things are always going to be there, which is inevitable. But can you really focus on what is best for you? So that we're talking about the companies, but the companies might not change. So it's up to each person to implement a system that works for them. Doesn't mean it has to be perfect. Doesn't mean it has to be every day. But you need to be able to know and feel when you're getting overwhelmed. You need to know when to take a day off. You need to know when to delegate or delete, as my mentor likes to say. And then I think each person can show up a little bit better or feel better, no matter the environment they might be in.
What advice would you give to people who understand these concepts, want to make this change in their life? It'll require that they have a conversation with their boss, their employer, their partner, to basically say, I need to set boundaries. I mean, setting boundaries with your friend is difficult, but setting boundaries with your employer is just a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people?
I would say really take some time and understand what that would look like for you. Write those down. And then share that with them in a conducive way, like collaborative. Because I think, again, in every industry, there's room for boundaries. For example, Someone could block their calendar every day from 9 to 10. That is my time to check my emails. Please don't book me for meetings. To an extent, like, what employer is going to be like, absolutely not. Unless it's a major emergency and the CEO needs to have a meeting with you. Most companies are like, okay, but did you get your work done? Right? So I think there is ways to empower yourself and have those conversations about what little things are important to you. Or every day blocking your lunch and saying, 12 to 1, I am out for lunch. I'm going to go look at the sky, the trees, eat a meal, connect with a friend, and I'll come back and get my work done. So I think there is room, and I think it's a collaborative process for all. And all people leaders, I think, are a little bit more on that path now than ever before.
When you say people leader, what does that mean? I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I guess anyone who more than one or two people report to them.
Okay.
You know, so like they're the person who would be their direct first person to bring those potential suggestions to.
So yeah. I thought something different, actually.
Oh, well, that works too.
Yeah.
But in the corporate space.
Yeah, because I think that, you know, we throw the word leader around a little loosely these days.
Tell me more. What do you mean by loosely?
Well, I think anybody that's in a position of authority is considered a leader, especially in a lot of corporate settings. And I don't think that's the case. I think you could be a manager because that's what you're doing. You're managing. But to be a leader, I think, requires a level of emotional intelligence that a lot of managers don't have. I've worked with managers who you can empty your soul to them, right? Because there's just that level of connection. Yeah. And you always felt like they had your back, and you would work the extra hour if you needed to, and you never once thought
for sure
badly about it. And then I've had managers where I was like, I would not lift my pinky finger for you. You're just an awful leader, right? And then oftentimes I've noticed these are individuals who were extremely successful in an isolated role that required them to with no oversight on other people. And that measure of success afforded them a promotion into a position that oversees other people. And they think that that same approach works for them, but now you're overseeing other people and it doesn't.
Doesn't work, yeah.
And so there's a conflict there. And suddenly you have people within that team who are either dropping out, burning out, not interested, checking out mentally.
I agree.
And I've been part of those teams. And I've seen superstar performers suddenly become the equivalent of someone who's just like, I can't even believe you still have a job.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate to see that these individuals are in these leadership positions, which is why I say it's thrown out loosely.
No, that's totally fair. It's not exactly what I was thinking, but I like that because I also think on the flip side, a coordinator could be a leader. A junior could be a leader. A leader isn't necessarily attached to your title, to your point, which I think is great because, you know, for the first time ever in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, EQ has become equally important to IQ, if not more. But, as you said, a lot of the leaders and a lot of people were never taught with that. So I also have compassion for those leaders because out of nowhere, now they're like, hey, we need you to actually implement all these new skills that no one ever talked to you about. And you're now, you know, a COO and you've been in this role for 20 years. That's difficult to unlearn and relearn so that you can better accommodate other humans. I have compassion for those leaders as well.
It's a struggle, but I think it reinforces this idea that, to your point, EQ has become so much more valuable.
Which makes me so happy.
Yeah, me too, because I think that it actually builds a better team. I mean,
Truly.
I'm a sports fan in general. I love watching sports. And I've always been fascinated by the idea of why some teams will make the captain of the team a person who may not necessarily be the best performer on the team. And oftentimes when you listen to the press conferences, they would talk about how this person was the most stand-up individual in the dressing room. They are, you know, the rest of the team loves them. They listen to them. And I thought, oh, so it's not about how many points you put up or how big your contract is or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's morale. And just, you know, as someone who has always felt like I was more of an EQ person my whole life, you know, I was always, even like in grade 4, when I was like, I talk about energy. I remember being like, ooh, please don't yell at me. You know, like anyone, like I won't listen if you're yelling at me. And I never thought that those skills would be rewarded. Because when I looked around at the world, it wasn't a place for it. But then I grew up and I was like, whoa, the world is shifting, and now caring about feelings and being a different style of leader is supported. And that's what, you know, really inspired me to kind of go deeper in this work. You know, I wasn't a confident kid at first. I didn't really like going to school or doing any of that. I was bullied so much. And naturally my response was, okay, let me bully them. I'm going to bully so that I don't get bullied.
Yeah.
But then, because I feel I'm a very intuitive person, I naturally didn't like the way it made me feel to make other people feel how I had felt. So then I started to do things differently. And again, I was only like, you know, in grade 4 when I started to think about these things. But by the time I got to grade 10, I was over 600 pounds. First only person of color at my new school. There was a lot coming at me. But I decided to literally lead with love, which is one of my favorite mantras, and show up as my best. And that allowed me to, you know, not be the bully, support other kids who are being bullied. And I went on to become prom queen and voted most popular kid in school. And none of that matters now because I'm in my 30s. But it's a reminder to me always that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, or what you look like. Building confidence within yourself is only something that can come from here, and it'll absolutely shift how you show up in the world. Because instead of people seeing me as a 600-pound kid in high school, they saw me as Raia. And that's invaluable because it made a difference in, it was almost like being reciprocated. Me showing up, receiving that. I never saw myself as that person. I just saw myself as Raia. And it's been a beautiful journey to see other people really see me for me. Because also back then, being masculine and all these things wasn't really supported. You know, 50 Cent was very big at that time. So we're all wearing the baggy clothes, bandana, and, you know, queer. So people, no matter what I showed up as externally, they saw me for me internally. And I think that is the most beautiful thing that has carried me through my life to continue to show up as myself.
Which is a good lesson for other people.
Exactly.
As you work with them, but as they listen and watch this.
100%.
I want to ask you one more question here.
Please.
You talked about leaders being more in touch with their people's emotions. There's also a growing narrative to say that that's not a conducive environment for growth and success over the long term for an organization or a team, where yes, to some degree you can be empathetic, but also this isn't a group therapy session. This is work.
Sure.
Where's the balance there? Because I can understand that argument and go, okay, yes, I want to be empathetic, but also we're here for a collective objective.
For sure.
So there's a time and place.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. At the end of the day, the leader is not qualified to be the therapist anyways. Right? But is there room for understanding and compassion? And that can look really different. For example, if someone says, hey, I've had a really tough week, some things happened in my life, can I please get an extension on this deliverable? A leader who's coming from a place of compassion will say, I'm really happy that you told me. Please take some time. I'll make sure to delegate this work. And why don't you take a couple of days off and let's check in then? So that leader isn't there to give you all the support and advice, but can they recognize that humans will go through things, and then right in this moment, this team member needs some support, and we're going to figure out a way to get that off their plate and make sure they have a couple of days and then come back. Whereas another leader might say, okay, get that done and then take some time off. Or, okay, thanks. Why don't you go talk to HR? Or,
It's my personal favorite.
Yeah, right?
I've gotten those, and I was just like, thanks.
Yeah, which makes people feel like I'm just a number, I don't matter, which completely removes that leadership piece, right? Simon said it best. He said leaders build teams where they know that leader would do the same for them. So I'm going to do this for them because I know that they would do this for me. And that's really the same experience I've had. When a leader shows that they care about me and can lead with love, like, yeah, you're going to put me in my place and I'm still going to get reprimanded if I didn't do something to an extent, but you care about me overall as a human.
Yeah.
And if I have that level of respect, then I will go the extra mile for you because I don't want to disappoint you or let you down or have you be impacted negatively. But I think it's a delicate dance on how to really create that, especially in big companies or big teams.
Yeah.
But that's why they bring in people like me.
Raia, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This was awesome.
Awesome.
I learned a ton. Stress can be good. Stress is good.
Stress can
It's
be
just
good.
about how you frame it.
Absolutely.
Um,
And hopefully no longer feeling as much imposter syndrome.
yes, that's the ultimate
Because
goal.
we know that lots of people are watching this.
You better. But subscribe, like, please. Just trust me, it'll help me
All
feel
of
a
it.
little better. Raia, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Congrats on the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
It's meaningful work. I think I love talking to people who are doing work that actually help other people, because I think there's so much value in that. And so kudos to you and your team. They deserve a shout out
the
as
team
well.
for sure. Yep.
But
Helena
thank
and
you so
Bridget.
much for coming by, and maybe we'll do a part 2 soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my life's work. So to hear you say that really means a lot. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Woo.
Thank you so much, everybody.